Hi, my dragons. This is part two of victimology measuring crime. So I want to go over the different generations of research and how we got to where we are today. And then we're going to stop at the different generations and we'll pick it up on Tuesday in class. Finally. Okay, so let's go over the different generations. So the first generation of victim surveys, we were created these because we thought, well, we'll do these victimization surveys and we'll see where it leads us. What do we know about victims? What don't we know about victims? So the first generation basically went through a business kind of survey. Maybe you might have heard of this. It's still active today, National Opinion Research Center. And this was started way back in the day in 1967. And it was the first national victim survey, and it targeted 10,000 households in the United States. Now, we have, what, 350 million people? More than that today. I don't know what the population was in 1967, but 10,000, that's a very small sample, okay? So, but we got better at it, don't worry. So, anyway, that first survey asked people to report on things that happened to them in the previous year, okay? Then they asked for more detail than what they gave. They did find that crime was underreported by 50%, just like we talked about in the UCR, probably more, okay? They had 4 times as many rapes and 3 times as many burglaries than were reported in the UCR. So that was disturbing. The only exception was car theft, and that's probably because everybody was required to have car insurance. So of course they're going to report that, and it would show up in a police report. They found almost 2 times more violent crime and 2.2 times more property crimes. So the conclusion was that the UCR underreported crime, and it was not reliable, not accurate, because of that dark figure of crime, okay? So the whole thing, you know, like starting out, we had to start someplace, right? So doing the NORCS research, you know, relying on a business to set it up, okay? That's what we did at first, and then we got better at it. So we found a lot of things that were unsettling and disturbing. I think we knew from that point that, wow, this has to get better, okay? The other thing you have to remember is that I find this to be really true and interesting is that we don't have criminal justice education right from the start. And I think that's something that we really need in the United States and we don't have. Like, we should do this, you know, right from the beginning, I think, right from first grade, so that people don't know that they're in a crime or they're committing a crime when they're doing it. Because people don't know things that are illegal. You know, if you tell them, hey, that's illegal, they look at you like, no, that isn't. Is it really? That's illegal. So we don't have that. So that, of course, would affect any kind of research that you're going to do, because they'll be like, wow, that was a crime. So not only do we have to deal with the dark figure of crime, we also have to deal with the type of thing that, you know, people just don't know that they have been a victim or that they have committed a crime. Kind of interesting. So there are methodological issues that we also had a problem with, you know, with NORC. The number of crimes reported, again, that small sample, 10,000, that's really not a lot. People reported things that weren't crimes. They missed things that were crimes. They reported things that weren't crimes. They don't really have a good picture of what is or isn't a crime, so that's a problem. Then there was something that we call telescoping. That's outside of the area of time that we reported. So like you say, did this happen in the last year? And, you know, they just think, oh yeah, oh, wait a minute, that was 2 years ago. Oh, that didn't, you know, that happened last week, you know, or something like that. Like if you said, what happened in the year 2020, and they're reporting like last week, and it's really 2021. Okay, so there's that, okay? So they have this telescoping thing. They also had memory issues. They forget the real good details of a crime, or they forget, you know, where were they, some of the details, things like that. The one thing that we really have changed now that was really big back in the day was they asked the head of household about the crime. So when you think of yourself, well, who's the head of my household? Is it your mother? Is it your father? Is it your grandparents? Or, you know, who is it, you know? And you know, the parents or grandparents or whoever that they designated as head of household, remember this was in the 60s, okay? Do you think that they know all the crimes? You ask yourself that. If you're going by your parents, did your parents know all the things you were up to back in the day? They don't know. And, sometimes crimes are embarrassing or really something that they want to keep private, so they're not going to tell their parents or their grandparents. So there's that. We did change that. That was one of the really big ones. So we knew that there were a lot of issues with the way America knew about crime, and the way, especially people wanted to discuss crime or didn't want to discuss crime. So that gave us a point where we had to change that sort of thing. So we had to redo it. So in the next generation, called the second generation of surveys, this is like 1970 to 71, we wanted to address some of these flaws that we had in the first one. And some of the flaws that we wanted to address right off the bat were recall problems. They wanted to, stimulate ways that victims could remember specifically what happened to them. And so we did this by way of a record check. So if they filed a police report, we matched up what they said afterwards with the police report. Okay. And so we compared, the victim accounts. And we did this in two ways. One was by a reverse record check and a forward record check. Okay. So a reverse record check, you look for their name in the police file, and then you contact the victim, and then you compare the stories to see if they mesh. Okay. So reverse record check showed that the victim's memory was a big issue. Okay. They did this within 3 months of the incident, and they found that was the best time for most accurate victim recall, and then it's downhill after that. And they also showed that recall was better for some events and some crimes. Granted, if it's a more stressful event or a more stressful crime or something that, caused them to, keep repeating it in their mind, then of course they're going to be better. There was a lot of telescoping. They couldn't figure out the time frame, how long ago that was, how many weeks it was, all of those time frame kind of things. And the wording of the questions really did affect the way they remembered things, okay, for their memory. On a forward record check, you ask the victim if they'd contacted the police and filed a report, and then you look for the report. And they found out that a third of them thought they had filed a report when really they didn't. So that was really interesting. And then when they did file the report, they were similar, okay, but there was telescoping, and we figured, well, we have to control for that because, that led to inaccuracies, and you don't want to be inaccurate, especially if you're trying to locate an offender or something like that. So that was a promising way of doing things, but it did need tweaking, refinement. And the researchers told the National Commission for Criminal Justice Research that they had 3 assumptions going forward from this. Number one, the assumption that police records are the appropriate place to actually benchmark with the victim accounts. Okay, just because a police officer comes to the scene doesn't mean that there's a report that's filed or that it moved forward in the process or anything like that. Number two, record check records are only for cases that come to the attention of the police officers in the first place. Sometimes they're there, they take down all the information, they didn't file it, or the victim had changed their mind, or something else happened. And number three, here's the big one. We live in the United States, there's 50 states, anybody can go anywhere at any time. So a lot of times, we found that the address had changed, they'd moved to a different state, it was very hard to get in touch with them later. So we had a whole new set of things to change for the third generation. So law enforcement decided, well, we're going to get the census involved because they have good records on people, and we're going to use them to keep records. So they created a panel design, and a panel design are surveys of the same household at regular intervals over a period of time. And these were called, and we also did bounding with this. So the first survey that you do, you put it in the calendar, and then that becomes the reference point for the second, which then becomes the reference point for the third, etc., etc. So it makes it easier in the subject's mind to remember that particular broken up time frame And they found that the accuracy really did increase after they did those kinds of things. And then 2 cities decided they were going to do their own research, San Jose and Dayton, and they became really famous for this. And they used self-response surveys and household surveys, so SR and HR. And the self-response surveys gave more personal crimes because people were more willing to talk about those crimes on that particular self-response. And they had less recall problems, okay, because again, personal. And at this time, businesses and other places were looking at their own research. So we see that businesses became interested in like theft or incidents that occurred on their property and things like that. And they found too that they were having the same kind of research issues as criminal justice did. So memory, telescoping, personal information, things like that. So there were 5 different conclusions, makes a great essay question, from the 2nd generation research. 1, we needed more specific questions that gave more accurate answers. 2, shorter periods to recall, okay, were better. 3, bounding helped with telescoping. 4, interviewing the people themselves was better than household interviews. And 5, you had to be careful about how you worded everything to increase the accuracy. So they did that for the next generation, the 3rd generation victim surveys. And they were excited because now they're making some headway and they're getting better data. And in this one, they included commercial businesses and special victimization surveys. And they did this in 26 states for those last 2 things. So the National Crime Survey, NCS, took place in 72, and they used a panel format for people all over the United States. And they planned to interview each member of the household. So that means 100% of the people that they had contacted. And they did it every 6 months for a 3-year period. They staggered it in the beginning, and they had endpoints for the subjects to, so that they could catch more subjects. What happened was 1/6 of the people left the survey. Attrition, you know, they moved, they got a different job, they went to a different place, and they were replaced by the next 1/6. 12,000 households were interviewed each month, so it became like a year-round process. They had a 6-month bounding period, and they had subsequent interviews that they checked with the prior one to make sure that everything was still staying consistent. They did experience that mover stayer problem, people moving, people not in the same place, and they corrected this by focusing on the place. So then they would just keep that same address and ask those people who came in, and they just did it by address. That way they still kept people, granted it wasn't the same people. And they talked with every person in the house, like I said before. In the 3rd generation, we had the business victimization survey. They got information from businesses and assessed their level of risk. And that was discontinued in 1977, though, because they used a sample of 15,000 businesses, which is really small in the United States. Think of all the businesses just in, you know, Tiffin. There's a lot. And so it became like really too small to generalize to the rest of the country. And it cost a lot of money because, you know, there's a lot of businesses. And then they did also city surveys, which they used 26 large cities that were randomly selected. And they used residents and businesses. 12,000 households. Excuse me, I'm going to pause this for a minute. Continuing, sorry for the interruption, but we were talking about the business victimization surveys and the 3rd generation. So the city surveys were 26 large cities, and it included residents and businesses. 12,000 households, 2,000 businesses, which again, not that big, especially if you consider a big city like Cleveland. 12,000. They had interesting findings, but they had a lot of overlap with some of the national survey. So they discontinued it because it was too expensive and it was, you know, just too small. Okay. We're going to stop there on Tuesday in class. We'll pick up with the 4th generation. I hope to get through the 4th generation, but I'm going to run out of time in this allotted time for the video. And, you know, we should be able to finish measuring crime on Tuesday. So I'm really excited to see you guys in person. I like that a lot better than making videos. I'm sure you guys do too. So I'll see you on Tuesday. It's a great day to be a dragon. See you then.